Hi there, and welcome to a new episode of Impact Talks. Today we have a great guest with us today, Guy Kirkwood, Chief Evangelist at UiPath. UiPath is one of the Forbes AI 50, a CNBC Disruptor 50. They got ranked as the number one tech company at the Financial Times ranking and number one in the Deloitte Fast 500. I'm super excited to have you on also because of your history and everything you've done in your career. But Guy, maybe you can introduce yourself towards our audience and who you are and what you do.
Yeah, well, thanks very much indeed for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. So the role of Chief Evangelist is the best job and the worst job title in the world. It's the best job because I get to talk to our community, to our customers, our partners, the analyst community, the press, and so on. But that isn't the most important part of my job. The most important part of my job is listening. So I spend much more time listening to that same community so that I can feed that back into our organisation, so that we can change, so we can adapt, so we can become better. One of the key things about our organisation is humility. I think we're one of the only organisations that base their entire culture around being humble. And being humble really means the ability to change your mind, the ability to change and listen and not argue your case just because you think you are right. So that fits in very well with my job. The reason, by the way, that I think it's the worst job title in the world is that I still have an inordinate number of people on LinkedIn who tell me that they're delighted that I've welcomed Jesus into my life, and I have to explain I'm not that type of evangelist. So I've been in my role now for 4 years. In fact, I joined UiPath when there were only 27 people in the business, and I've done a little bit in helping it to grow to where it is today.
So maybe for the listeners out there, especially because we have a pretty big tech community around us, what does UiPath do exactly? How big are you guys today? Could you maybe elaborate more on that?
Yeah, sure. So UiPath is robotic process automation company. So robotic process automation, or RPA for short, is the software that runs software. That's the easiest way of describing it. So when you do your job, your day-to-day job, there are a lot of boring, mundane, repetitive stuff that you've got to do your job. That cut and paste activity, what used to be called swivel chair activity. So you're taking information from one system and then putting it onto another. That's a classic example where RPA can actually do that for you. And what that does, it releases you so that you can do higher value work. So what's interesting is that up until about 2 years ago, organizations based their RPA business cases, in other words, we want to invest in this type of software, on job cuts, on cost out, on headcount reduction. But actually what they found once they put automation in is that they have happier, more engaged employees. And in fact, we did a study with Forrester, one of the leading analyst firms, on exactly this topic, on the link between improved employee engagement and improved customer experience, which of course in today's world is absolutely critical. You cannot survive as an organization without having good customer experience, but you also need good employee experience in order to make that work. And RPA is a really good way of improving employee experience, because as Dave Johnson, who's the analyst, said, what employee experience is whether you think that the work that you're doing is important. Is it important in moving the organization onwards? If it isn't, your engagement levels are quite low. But if it is, the engagement levels go up. And that's the critical point, because RPA allows you to do that. And the best quote I've come across was a chief executive of one of our customers. He said, since we put in automation, the mood music of our business has changed. We now have happier employees, and we now measure our service, and it's an insurance business, and not through complaints, but through compliments. That has nothing to do with technology. It's all about culture change. And that's really what RPA and UiPath allows. As far as how successful we've been, I mean, as was said at the beginning, we've grown very, very fast indeed. In fact, some people consider us to be the fastest growing enterprise software business in history. And we can talk a bit about why that might be. But what that's driven is a massive increase in the number of customers. So 2 years ago, we had 5 of the Fortune 500 as customers. I don't mean 5%, I mean 5 of them. Now we have over 65%. And if you look at our revenues, they're very evenly split. For a 4-year-old business, this is amazing. Split between Americas at about a third, Europe about a third, and Asia about a third. And the differences between those different geographies is something, again, we can talk about, because it isn't the same in every geography as to why they're using automation.
How did you get involved into UiPath? Because obviously you have a very interesting history, which we'll get into it as well. But, I think at one point you've had a pretty great career. You were director of Capgemini, which is a huge company. So how come you end up going into, I guess, a startup, which granted it's growing, but why go into that career path?
Yeah, I mean that's a really good question. Let's wind back 20 years. So 20 years ago, something called shared services was just starting to happen, and outsourcing, business process outsourcing, IT outsourcing, been going on for decades, but business process outsourcing. That's where organizations gave their work to best or low-cost locations for people to do. And I was involved in that market right from the start. And if you look at shared services, that's the same, but for a captive operation. So the client is the company that actually owns that, as opposed to outsourcing it to another organization. And it was a guy called Mark Hodges, who is now chairman of an organization called Acresis. But he, at the time, was working with TPI. It's one of the sourcing advisory organizations. And he went to a particularly crappy hotel in Heathrow, where he had basically the entire UK sales operations for every single IT outsourcing company. And he stood on stage and he said, "The future is not ITO, the future is BPO." And there was a look of blank bewilderment on the faces.
Wait, what does that mean, BPM?
BPO, business process outsourcing. So taking the process from an organization and then running it externally. So a good example of that is Genpact. So Genpact grew out of a shared service operation. So it was the IT shop for GE. So it was originally called Jekis. Then it commercialized and became Genpact. Genpact is one of the best, in fact, probably the best finance and accounting outsourcing organizations in the world. So they run finance and accounting operations for their clients. So when Mark stood up and said, the future is BPO, that was a road to Damascus moment. I realized that actually it made a lot of sense for organizations to be set up to do this, as opposed to everyone trying to run their own. Wind forward, having been in that BPO market and shared services market for 20 years, we were doing a deal. I was working for an outsourcing company. We were doing a deal with a technology business where their offline order processing system, not online, but offline order processing system, was 20 years old. And that was not peculiar, because in a lot of organizations, they're still running on legacy operations, green screen applications, the old mainframe jobs. The organization had tried to change that system 6 times over the last 20 years. But every time they tried to do it, something fell over. They couldn't connect it via APIs through, in other words, machine to machine, because it was so old and rubbish. So they had to use
Which
people.
organization were you working for at the time?
I was working for Sutherland Global Services at that time.
Okay.
So Sutherland, smallish, it's about $1 billion revenue. BPO provider, mainly in the contact center outsourcing operations, but they were doing this order processing thing. And what happened was that we went to the technology business and said, okay, so we can take your offline order processing people, there's 1,000 people, and we can do what we normally do as an outsourcer. We'll take those people on, we'll take on their contracts, so you don't employ them anymore. We will do Lean, Six Sigma, process improvement type activities to improve the process. We'll improve the technology. We'll move those people offshore. to a best or low cost location, so they're not going to cost you as much, and so we'll provide you with the same service but for less money. And the organisation said, yeah, great idea. We've already done all of that. So 96% of the people in that operation were already in best or low cost locations. So there was no way that we could make any money doing it. There was no way that we could. There was no fat in the operation that we could actually improve, unless we automated. So the team originally went to see Blue Prism, who invented, they're a British company, and they invented RPA back in 2002. And really from 2006, they really started to develop really well. I mean, the market would not be here without Blue Prism. I've got a huge amount of respect for the organisation and the team there that built it. So they created this RPA type product to move the information through between systems. So you need fewer people, or the people could do higher value work. And then we went to see an organisation called Deskover, which at that point was 7 people in an apartment block in Bucharest in Romania. That's what became UiPath. So those 7 people were the founders of UiPath. What happened was that we automated the activity for the technology client, and the results were so staggering in terms of reduction in errors, in terms of speed, in terms of...
What do you mean with like automated? Because we're talking about a huge
automated
call center.
Okay, so instead of people going, okay, so here is an order that comes in for the tech, we need to collect that data. We then need to move it into the order processing system. The order processing system then goes off to the warehousing system and the setup of the PCs in this case, and so on. Then it comes back to the order processing. Then it gets out to shipping. So there's a lot of toing and froing between the different between the different systems that made this run, that had to be done by people. Now,
what were the people? Why was there a call center doing that? Why was it not people?
No, it isn't a call center. So Sutherland was known for its call center outsourcing, but in this case, this was order processing, or it was just a business process outsourcing.
Right. And so the people, what were they doing? Were they sending the emails through
No, they were literally transferring information, cutting and pasting information from whatever system they were working with into this order processing system, this green screen application, where you've got green writing on black screens, and then into other systems. So it was literally either rekeying or cutting and pasting, and that's all they did all day.
So they were pretty much like robots, just copy.
They were exactly that. They were pretty much like robots, and so because you're replacing those human robots with software robots that run software. That meant that they released them to then go do higher value work in terms of customer experience and so on.
So it was almost like a Zapier type of situation where you put an input, like if this happens, then you have to do that, and they pretty much did that.
Yeah. So that was then. So I was so impressed with the results. You asked me how I joined UiPath. So impressed with the results. I started writing about it and talking about it. And then I was approached by UiPath's first backer, an organisation called CCAM. No, it wasn't. It was Early Bird, which is a German venture capital organisation. And by Daniel Dines, our chief executive and co-founder, and asked me to come and help grow and build the business, which I did, and I started in December 2015. So we're now four and a half years later.
Yeah, 5 years almost. But
so 4.5 years later.
Yeah. So you joined into the organization, but what attracted you to switch over from that organization? I mean, obviously was it really just that one test case and you saw the potential and then you wanted to join?
Exactly. It's that light bulb moment. It's that road to Damascus moment where you go, forget about everything I've done for the last 20 years. Actually, this is the future, because it doesn't have all the issues with people doing these works, because they, once you set these robots up, they don't make mistakes, and they are so much faster. They will run at the speed of the systems that they're operating on, doing exactly the same thing time after time after time after time, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year.
Yeah, I really believe in automation. I think it is the way of the future. However, I've had discussions, obviously, also from our audience, where it gets almost into a debate where is this really the future? What about people and stuff like that? My take on that
that's
is
a good point.
obviously, if you can automate the mundane tasks, people can be doing what they actually should be doing, which is creative tasks. Because
Precisely.
that's not that hard to automate. But yeah, maybe I would love to hear your opinion on that because you're in that bubble.
Yeah, no. I mean, you're exactly right. So let's go back a bit and say, talk about the organisation and why I went into a startup. A, it was really exciting, and B, after 20 years, I realised that a product company can scale exponentially. A services business that relies on people can only scale linearly. That was the difference. Interestingly, if we think about COVID and the coronavirus, if you look at the people that recognised that the pandemic was going to hit the earliest, they were bankers and tech people, because they both understand exponential growth. That hockey stick growth.
Yeah, right.
And so that was very interesting. So I mean, personally, I locked down my family in February because I knew it was coming. In fact, I did a presentation with some analysts, and this is before I got my green screen. And downstairs there was a big stack of bags behind me, and one of the analysts said, what have you been panic buying for the lockdown? I said, horse food. That's the only thing we bought of any great content. So anyway, if you look at the organisations that are automating the fastest, these are organisations that are using RPA as part of the answer. It is not a silver bullet. It is not the nirvana that organisations think it might be. And as an evangelist, I should be out there saying, yes, this is the best thing that has ever come up. It isn't. It is a tool for your toolkit.
But maybe, sorry to interrupt, but maybe the question that pops up is, why do companies not just have one system so that you don't have to have the system-to-system interaction?
That's the question that IT have been trying to answer for the last 50 years.
But why so most companies don't have that, I'm assuming then?
Well, no. I mean, if you look at shared service operations in Europe alone, there are 1,800 shared service operations. In other words, companies that are internally running their own finance and accounting and procurement and HR and other functions within their organisation. They set them up in a shared service operation. There are 1,800 of those. 80% of those don't even have a single instance of ERP, of enterprise resource planning.
So we're not talking about like logistically only. We're talking about between departments. You guys also cover those type of interactions.
Absolutely, yes. And in fact, what we're now seeing is that, and we're starting to see as a result of COVID, is that organisations within an industry are now saying, does it make sense for us all to have our own capability? Let's take manufacturing, for instance. If you're a manufacturing business, you have commercial advantage at the moment, or did have, of having a smarter, faster, cheaper supply chain, just in time. For the last 15 years, then organisations have been disintermediating. So they've been, so that stuff is produced to make whatever you're making, and then it's delivered and you make it. So it makes it much more efficient, but it makes it incredibly fragile. So that COVID, once that supply chain breaks, you are stuffed because you can't build anything because you can't get hold of the stuff that you need to build. So organizations are now starting to think, and we're actively involved in this, okay, so if supply chains are fragile, how do we get around that? Firstly, there are going to be a whole breed of new organizations that are actually intermediaries. So you're disintermediating the intermediaries, the other way around. You're creating intermediaries from the disintermediation. So that what they're doing is they are taking the risk and holding the stock, but that will make it more expensive. Alternatively, what you do, because a lot of industries are running on the same platform, on the same, let's take car manufacturers, there are only a set number of rolling stocks, regardless of what you put on the top, and whether it's a Peugeot or a Renault or a Citroen or whatever it is. So what you've then got is your organisation say, okay, so why don't we get together and actually automate the supply chain as an industry? Now that's very interesting because that's been done before. If you look at Visa was a creation of the banks that paid for by the banks because they didn't want to set up their own card processing and card payments for each individual bank. So they said,
I had no idea.
Yeah, well, that was it. That's a really early example of that. So if we do that within manufacturing, you won't have your differentiation based on how smart and fast and cheap your supply chain is, because everyone's got the same. But you do have surety that it's going to be operational. And importantly, very importantly, given the changes that we're seeing at a societal level, is that it's the relationship you keep with your customers. It's your customer intimacy that will actually dictate the success or failure of you as an organization. And we all know organizations that are really good at that and organizations that are really bad. So we're going to see a fallout based on customer experience, customer intimacy. And as I've already said, there is a direct link between employee engagement, employee experience, and customer experience, which makes sense. If you've got happy employees, you get and tend to end up with happier customers. And automation is the engine that drives that.
Right. So back to, because I'm really interested in hearing the end of that story. But so you discovered UiPath when they were with 7 people and 7 co-founders, you said?
Well, there were 2 co-founders. So there's Marius Tierka, who's our CTO, and Daniel Dinez, who's our chief exec.
So, and
then the team that supported him.
Okay, so there were 7 people, and then you joined as an employee.
I joined a bit later. They hired some more engineers. So I actually joined as employee number 27.
And then, how many employees do they have now?
Just under 3,000 across 26 countries.
How crazy was that scale to experience?
Manic. I mean, it's been described as hyperscaling or blitzscaling. It becomes a machine. So
when you joined in 27, right? So how old was the company, just for context?
Well, okay, so 2006, Daniel was previously an engineer at Microsoft out in Redmond. He returned home to set up his own business in 2006, home being Bucharest in Romania. So from 2006 to 2013-14, they worked on libraries. So when you click on a word and it comes up with a dictionary, or you right click on a word, it comes up with a dictionary and definitions. That's what he worked on, and it was a flop. It was a failure. But then Daniel didn't even know how to spell BPO, business process outsourcing, but he could see that this was of value. So he completely pivoted the organisation, or they pivoted the organisation, all based around what has become RPA.
And so
that was 2014, and I joined in 2015.
So then 2014, the restructuring, I guess, happened, and then 2015 you joined in, and then, so we're talking about, and when was that first time you collaborated with them?
That was, the original deal was back end of 2013. I think it was signed in February or March of 2014.
So it was pretty much 2014, you joined 2015, and then from there on, it was 2014, 7 people, and now 2020, 3,000 people. So
just under 3,000, about 2,900 and something.
And you were hired as a chief evangelist from the beginning, or?
No, funnily enough, I wasn't. I was hired as chief operating officer. So
wow, so you were in the middle of that hyper blitz scaling.
Yeah. Except I was a really crap COO. After about 6 months, Daniel and I went out for sushi, and he said, "It's not working, is it?" I said, "No, it's not working." I said, "What was it exactly you wanted me to do?" And he said, "I wanted you to magically run the business for me." I went, "That's not me." So he came up with the idea of chief evangelist, because chief evangelist as a role was actually started by Apple. So there's a chap called another guy, actually, Guy Kawasaki,
Yeah.
who was the chief evangelist of Apple. And Steve Jobs wanted him to sell Apple to everybody. And he said, I can't do that because people are using DOS and Windows. They're zealots. They're never going to use Mac because that's never the twain shall meet. He said, however, I can sell to the agnostics. So that's what the chief evangelist does, sells to the agnostics.
Yeah, that's a good one. But so, just from your experience, obviously, chief evangelist, you then go and you convert the agnostics. But yeah, tell us a little bit about that experience witnessing in 5 years such a growth. What was happening? Can you explain it a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, we're helped in two ways. One is that we are incredibly open. So we're always open with our customers and with our partners, and it's been back to the humility thing. It's been a function of the way that we operate. So we're very open in the way we work. What that's done is it's attracted funding money, venture capital money. So if you look at the organisations that have backed us, so starting with Early Bird and Seedcamp and Credo, and then moving to the Accels of the world and so on, CapG, so capital G, which is Alphabet or Google's venture arm. Now we've got in Series D and recently announced last week actually our Series E. We've got institutional investors. Now that's very rare for a pre-IPO business to be backed by institutional investors. In other words, people who are investing their pension funds with organisations. So there is something about the organisation that is extremely attractive, and that's something that's attractive to them is that when you go and see these people, boys and girls, the first question they've got is, okay, so what's the total addressable market for your product? And for the total addressable market for our product is a robot for every person. Every person will eventually have their own robot to automate the bits of their job that they hate, and they want to leave that to the robot. And actually, talking to Maureen Fleming, who's the lead analyst for IDC in this area, and she believes that everyone will have their own robot. So it will be used at home to automate the bits of your life that it can, as well as at work. And so if you think back to the late 70s, early 80s, Bill Gates said that he envisaged a time when every household and every desk would have a computer.
Right.
And he got laughed at. No one thought that we were going to be there. Now we carry around these things in our pockets.
Exactly.
So that's the total addressable market. And remember I said that if you look at our revenues, very evenly split between Americas, Europe and Asia, what we're finding is that organisations are scaling up their operations as a result of COVID much faster. So I think we had about 5 customers last year that were spending more than $1 million on our licenses. Now we have 60. And in fact, we've got another 70 in the pipeline. That's scaling automation on a really significant scale. And actually, a couple of them, like PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers, they did a pilot last year where they gave all of their US employees a robot, and a UiPath robot. And that went so well, they've now extended it to every PwC employee in the world.
What do you mean a robot? You guys
That's
have
the
a
license.
physical
They will
robot?
have the ability to. So let's rewind a bit. So there are 2 types of robot. There's the robot that does the stuff that you hate, that you never ever want to see again, that requires no human interaction whatsoever, that sits in the back office, it sits on the server, it just gets on with stuff. As something gets dropped into its inbox, it will just work on it. Okay. The second type of automation, second type of robot, is the attended robot. That's the robot that sits on your machine, and then you have in your tray, you have a number of, or you can build them yourself actually. You have a number of tasks that you want to do. And so you interact with the robot in the same way that you would with a colleague. So you say, oh, can you just do that for me? You just get the robot to do it. And so either you wait for it, or indeed now we have the ability to do it picture in picture. So if you're working on something, you can get your robot to do it on a separate instance of your machine in the background. You can see it working. And that's where the human in the loop comes through really well. So it becomes a natural part of the way that you work together.
Well, I had no exact idea how you guys were doing it, but that seems so simple actually. So it kind of explains why it went so successful.
It is simple. That's the point about the market, and the great thing about successful businesses. You go, well, why didn't I think of that? It is actually very simple task.
How
the technology behind it is really complicated, and the ability to get it to work consistently is really complicated and hard to do. But actually, when you see it working, you go, well, that's great.
And is this only for businesses? Because I saw you guys are a B2B business, or is it also for consumers?
Yeah. So we've got 7,000 customers now, all B2B. But interestingly, we also provide our software platform for free for anyone that wants to try it. And in fact, for any organization below $5 million revenue can use our platform entirely free of charge. And then all of our training and our certification, also free. So what that's done is it's democratized. I know that sounds crappy, but what it's done is it's spread itself out really, really fast as more and more and more people are using it. So we've now got, out of those 7,000 customers who are paying us, plus the free ones, I think we've got about 750,000 people around the world now using.
So it's pretty much like you've created a freemium model where if you're a small business, you get to use it for free. The moment you start growing, you can pay for it.
Exactly. And in fact, if you think about the competitive market, I mean, they're known as the big three. We're not that big, but they're known as the big three. So there's us, so UiPath, there's Automation Anywhere, and there's Blue Prism. And in fact, there's a guy called Alex Gessels who used to work for WorkFusion, who described it as automation as the new BAU, the new business as usual, which was appropriate because the B is Blue Prism, the A is Automation Anywhere, and the U is UiPath, which I rather liked, so I stole it. But if you look at those big three, then you've got a whole plethora of challenger RPA vendors that are doing either specialist areas or in terms of ingestion engines and so on, or they are not as big or not as widespread or whatever. And those are the organizations, I believe, that are going to get acquired by the big guys. We're already starting to see it. So Microsoft acquired one of the smaller companies called Softomotive last year. IBM have just moved into the market. They bought a Brazilian RPA vendor, very small, called WDG. So I'm expecting the Amazons and the Googles and the Salesforces to buy some capability that allows them to move into the RPA market because the TAM is so huge.
But so maybe interesting and to make it more relatable to our community also, a small business, what can they use it for? Let's say, startup starting out, or maybe a brick and mortar business, can they use your service somehow? What do they mostly use it for?
Well, I mean, what's interesting is that if you look at the organizations that are using us, it's not only the traditional brick and mortar organizations, but it's also the Ubers and the Amazons that are using us. So it's the born to be digital organizations as well as the more brick and mortar types.
And what can they use it for? Can you show some example?
So most organizations that go into using RPA, regardless of which vendor they decide to use, start in finance because the world runs on Excel. So what tends to happen is that a system will dump something into Excel, the people will look at it in Excel, manipulate that, and then put it into another system. So from ERP to CRM type activities. So finance departments basically run the world on Excel. So because Excel is so fast on RPA, because of course it's reading millions of lines very, very quickly indeed and never making a mistake, importantly, tends to start in finance departments. But there are examples where they start in other areas. So you could start in human resources, or you could start, in terms of recruiting people, or
And what do they do? What do they tell the robot to do then exactly? So with finances, I'm assuming they say take this Excel sheet and put it into
precisely. So take the data out of this Excel spreadsheet that has come from this system and put it into that system here. And the important thing is that it needs to do that consistently every time, but also adapt to changes. And that's that's where the intelligence of these systems have improved dramatically over the last 2-3 years. So it's that intelligence that everyone talks about AI, but it's the intelligence built into the system that's things like try catch. So if something falls over, then you try it in a different way. And the robots can all do that naturally now, which is really cool. But the really, really important thing, and related to an acquisition we made, 2 acquisitions actually, we made towards the back end of last year, is in the area of process mining and task mining. Why is that important? It's because most organizations, as you've said, who are starting down the journey of automation are saying, well, where do I start? What is automatable? How many of my processes are automatable? Can you automate the entire process? And so on and so forth. They all ask the same question. So previous to the acquisitions we made, I did a big project with Everest Group, another analyst firm, on how to spread automation throughout your entire organization, to move from pilot, in other words, trying it out, right the way through to having automation spread throughout your entire organization. There was a step-by-step guide, and in fact that's available for free. Everything's for free. Available for free from our website if anyone wants to have a look, or drop me an email. Excuse me. So that was how we did it before. But actually, process mining, the way that works is if you think about a process, you have the optimum route through that process. So as you said, you take this and you copy it into that, you then move that and move it to there, and then you bring those two together, calculate that and move it somewhere else. That's a classic example of it, which is basically why it was called macros on steroids originally, but it's moved on a lot more than that. So if you start with that premise, that process that you are doing may have multiple different variances, multiple exceptions. And if you think that you've got tens or hundreds of people all doing this similar process within an organization, or 2 or 3 even within a startup doing this process, whatever process it might be, it's much better to get a robot to do that. But humans cheat. They always find easy ways of doing things. They never follow instructions. Even people in the same team do things, the same process in different ways. So you have to look at the process mining in 2 ways. One is you look at the output. So what happens in the systems that actually drives the operation? So what systems are you connected to? What are the logs? So that's process mining. Second part is task mining or task capture. What that does is it takes what the human has actually done, what keystrokes they've done, what they did with their mouse, and so on and so forth, that actually creates the output. And by combining those two, we're now in a situation where we can create what's known as a process description document, or an XAML, a XAML script, that then goes to the developer for who will build you a robot to do that. And so it creates the framework, if you like, the superstructure that you then create the robot. And that's individual for each person and each process that they can do. And then you combine the best of breed of that to create what some people call the happy path. I hate that phrase, but the happy path through a particular process. And that's what you teach the robots to do. And once they can do it, they will do it and do it and do it.
And so this is all available in the free model?
It's all process mining and task mining is not free, because that is actually, if you think about it, you can use some of it because you can drag and drop that into what's known as Studio, which is the bit of software that would use to develop the robots. You can drag some of that capability in, but the process mining tends to be used by large organizations, because smaller organizations who are using the free platform, our free edition, Community Edition it's called, tend to know what the processes are because they tend to be quite small. Whereas large organisations could be across multiple countries, multiple languages, where the systems don't talk to each other, the people don't talk to each other, and we've had that before, where it's very, very difficult. So all of those variances. So that's the first part of process understanding. We call it understanding. What to automate and how you then automate that. The second part of process understanding is what happens when things change, because processes inevitably always change. You have updates on the systems, or there's a new way of working, or you bring in a new company or a new country. So those things will change, and that will trigger exceptions. So because something's changed, the robots will go, I don't understand this. So what's going on? So then you use process mining and task mining again, and that will then tell you what the new happy path is through that operation, through that process, and the robots can be updated. Now, the direction of travel we're moving in, we're not there yet, but the direction of travel is that ultimately the system will just watch what the human does. And every time you do a replicable, something repeatable, it will work out what the optimum route is, and then it will learn from that and say, okay, I can automate this process for you now. So that's self-building robots. The other end is it will automatically work out what the changes are, reconfigure itself, and that's self-healing robots. We're not there, but that's the direction of travel. So this will just become your assistant, your digital assistant.
How long do you think it'll take to get to self-learning robots like that who just view what you do and then you have yourself a robot?
You probably need to speak to, well, in fact, you definitely need to speak to our either our CTO or our head of product, so Param Carlin, or Palak. She's fantastic, runs our AI operations. They would know the answer to that. My guess, we're looking at about 18 months, 2 years out.
That's really
before
fast.
we've got a minimal viable product for them. Something like that.
So one of the things, I still want to kind of go back to the examples. I love stories and examples. Can you maybe give another example? The big business, I clearly understand. I mean, different systems, different languages, you mentioned it. If you have a robot, it's super clear. What's not super clear for me is the small businesses. Like an everyday Joe or whatever has a business or starting a business, let's say like 5, 10, 20, I don't know how many employees, but what kind of robot can they use? Obviously in finance, I see some applications like you take from your Excel sheet into your accountancy software, but you said HR. How can they use that software in HR or maybe
HR
sales?
uses it in recruitment. So you can automate, you asked how we grew so fast, we automated our recruitment.
So what did you do then? How did you automate the recruitment?
Well, because a lot of people wanted to work with us, you had thousands of CVs coming in. In fact, I think at one point we had 30,000 people who wanted to join us. So you can't get humans to deal with that. So every CV was scanned. It was then did name identity recognition on it, sentiment analysis, a lot of the sort of document understanding type technologies, pulled out the keywords, and then looked at things like tenure. In other words, how long you've worked with organisations before, the sort of organisations. All of that would be automated, and then it would siphon off those people that would be appropriate based on the jobs, based on the job spec, and then sent through to HR to have a look. So these are the ones that we recommend.
So the stories that I've heard of, like the PwCs and everything, scanning CVs, you guys pretty much provide the software that just scans all the CVs and filters people out?
No, I mean, originally, that was done by organisations like ABBY, ABBYY. They were an early exponent of this document understanding or intelligent document processing. But there are a whole plethora of organisations that do that, and in fact, a lot of them are now open source. So both Microsoft and Google have algorithms and machine learning activities that are built to do that, built to have a look at the look at documents and work out what's in them and then transact them. So let me give you an example. You like examples.
Wait, before that, does the CV have to be a special format, or literally
Nope.
any type of CV can just be a...
Any CV. And in
Wow.
fact, the systems are now clever enough that they can actually understand handwriting.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
crazy. I had no idea. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry,
So-
continue with the example.
Yeah, so this was actually the perfect example. So there's a financial services organisation in South Africa, and they had, I think, about 1.5 million emails coming into their organisation a year, and that email could be about anything, because of course it's free text. So one of our partners, one of our implementation partners, is a company called Lark, that's LARC .ai, so Lark AI. So they used a combination of different technologies. Remember I said that RPA is the glue that holds this together,
Right.
but there are lots of different technologies you can use. So they used Watson, for instance, IBM Watson, for some of the cognitive activities. They used Abby for the document ingestion engine. They used natural language processing from another organisation, and so on and so forth. I think it was Data Robot, actually, for machine learning. And what they did was they automated, using UiPath as the bedrock, as the framework.
Overarching kind of connecting between the
Precisely,
systems.
exactly. So they automated 98% of all the emails that came into the organisation, which is just jaw-dropping. So every email, doesn't matter what it's about. It could be about a loan. It could be about a claim. It could be about anything at all. And it will work out who it was from, what it was about, what the sentiment was like. So in other words, is it a complaint letter or is it a praise letter or whatever it might be, what to do with that. And then the RPA robots would then allocate that to the different other systems and departments so that it could be transacted. So that they were in a situation where 98% of those emails never saw a human. And they were then, the system would then email that person back saying, thank you very much for applying for a loan. Please go and see your local manager who will talk through blah, blah, or whatever it was. All automated. Just
So
amazing.
all the empty emails that were not supposed to be there in the first place got a response with super clear instructions where they had to be.
Well, it's not only instructions on what they had to be, but not only instructions on what the email should be, because the email could be about anything, but it was directly related to the question or the issue that email came up with. I want to change my address, or in which case, thank you very much for letting us know that your new address is XYZ. Our systems have all been updated.
Oh,
No human
wow.
involved
It
in
just
that whatsoever.
automatically updated the system as well.
All of the systems. And in fact, that's really important because that really helps with things like governance and compliance.
So why don't all governments have something like this? And maybe
Well,
another question.
that's what they're doing. I mean, we're working with 70 US federal agencies now.
Really? Because you hear all these dramas with the polling stations and everything, and I feel like you could automate like 98% of that stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Well, in fact, that's even easier because it's just an X in a box.
Exactly. But
So,
why isn't this happening all over the world, or like?
And it should be. And it probably will be.
But why isn't it though? Is there a specific reason for it?
Two reasons: the traditional "not invented here" syndrome. So either an organisation, a government says, "Well, we've always done it this way, and so therefore we're going to continue to do it this way, but we'll try and make it more efficient." The second reason is that in most organisations, most governmental organisations, aren't aware of it. I mean, they're consulting and system integration companies. The organisations that help them improve know about this stuff and are putting it in. But organisations are worried about people losing their jobs. And the beauty about automation is that no one has to lose their job.
How come you're saying
all
that?
you're doing is wasting. Sorry?
How come you're saying that nobody? I can assume that if you can automate the job of, let's say, 100
No,
people.
well, that's the secret. You are not automating the job. You are automating bits of the job that you don't want to do in the first place. So that's where the employee engagement, the happier employees come in. Now, interestingly, if you take an organisation, a great example is an insurance business in the UK called Admiral. Admiral Insurance, as in Admiral of the Fleet. So the guy that runs their automation business, or their automation operation, is a chap called Neil Davis. Now, he started with one UiPath robot, one license. And within 18 months, he had robots in 10 of the 12 departments in that organisation in all areas. So in the back office functions like procurement and HR and finance, into the mid office functions, those industry specific processing areas like first notice of loss and claims processing, and into the front office, into customer service, customer experience, contact centre type operations, robots everywhere. And the way he did it, and this is a top tip for your listeners and viewers, is that he went to every department and said, you give me your smartest person and I'll give you smart robots back. Because those smart people understand the processes sit within that department. Afterwards, he found out that the common denominator of those people is that they were all gamers. They play board games or video games because they have exactly the right mentality when it comes to building robots, in that they're clever, they're persistent, they're problem solvers. That's what you need.
That's so interesting to figure out. And also, I have to say, I think I've been in the sector for so long. This is the first time that I'm starting to understand what you can do with data and automation. It's never been explained so simple to me. I mean, I was aware that obviously if you have a process like I need to put this Excel thing into this software, there was probably something like that. But so far, I've only seen these really complex things that you don't know how to program, and it's just like, I'll do it myself kind of thing.
Well, you need to make it as simple as possible. It's that ease of use that will drive adoption. So you want to make it either ultimately automatic, so it just happens, but you want to make it at the moment as easy to use as possible. So it's dragging and dropping. It's no code, low code stuff. So anyone can build a robot. There was a lady at Singtel in Singapore who'd been producing reports for, I think it was 30 years on a weekly basis. She's 69. She built her own robot and automated that report building process. And she's just been promoted twice, I think, since she did that about 6 months ago.
I feel like you can do this also in education for teachers. There are so many processes that they're doing, like correcting tests for super simple things. And you guys say that you recognize handwriting as well?
Yeah. So we actually have a team that's dedicated to that. This is called the Academic Alliance. So the Academic Alliance is actually not based on schools, although we have done, build a robot for children. But it's mainly aimed at universities. So universities, William and Mary College in the US, for instance, they've given all of their students a UiPath robot. And so they automate the bits of their courses and so on that they can, and run their calendars and diaries and so on and so forth.
They give the students a UI so what does the robot do for them exactly?
Whatever they want to build. So whatever task that they think is automatable, they can build a robot to do that.
But what does the students automate? Do you have an
No, I don't have an example, okay. But off the top of my head. But our Academic Alliance team have said that RPA is one of those technologies that will become ubiquitous. And again, I emphasise the fact that it's not the silver bullet, but it's just it's a framework from which you can do other stuff as well. So if if RPA is going to become ubiquitous at work, students need to learn about it now. And so we thought that it was going to take quite a long time to sign up universities because curricula take quite a while to actually work out what you're going to teach and when, and that can take years in some cases. In the first 6 months, I think we had 200 universities around the world sign up to be part of the Academic Alliance.
Wow.
Now, there was a really cool idea that we implemented as well, so that if the university puts automation into their curriculum, then they can use our platform free. Not under the 5 million, but some of these are very significant universities. But you can run the university more efficiently using automation, and they're able to do that for free if they put RPA into their, or UiPath into their curriculum.
What's the business model behind that if such a large organization takes your thing for free?
Because when the students go into work, what's the platform that they know?
Oh, okay, like that. And
this is why Google and Apple have been trying to get into the K-19, if that's the right word, into the education market for their product, so people get used to using their product or their service.
Isn't it that I have no idea about this the exact details of these things, but isn't it like Windows and Mac where technically it's kind of the same? If you know how to use one, you might be able to use the other because it kind of looks the same. Is it not the case like that with UiPath and the
others? It's not, because the platforms are all built in different ways and they all operate in different ways, and the instruction sets are different and so on. So what we've found is that organisations that started, I mentioned Blue Prism, so that started using Blue Prism got to the stage where it was really good at running the operations that they got it to run, but when they wanted to do other things, they found that very difficult. So then they came to us and said, these are the areas that we want to focus on. Can you help us? And we said, yes, of course. And one important thing to remember on this is, should we throw away the Blue Prism robots and go all UiPath? And the situation's changing now, but previously we said no. If you've got a sunk cost there, you've got an investment. Leave them running. Keep them doing what they do. It's just as you come to extend and expand, particularly into attended robots, then UiPath is the way forward. And it was the same with Automation Anywhere. So Automation Anywhere customers then came to us. I mean, that's probably why we grew and have grown faster than anyone else, because Blue Prism customers came to UiPath, Automation Anywhere customers came to UiPath. Not very many, in fact, almost no, went between between Automation Anywhere and Blue Prism.
And so we
seem to sort of collect.
When you're looking at what you said, the future in 2 years, hopefully you'll have this where you record the actions on your
Fingers
screen
crossed.
and then the robot will do it for you. At that point, I can imagine that most of the user interfaces between all the competitors will kind of look the same if they all have that, because at the end of the day, you'll just be clicking some stuff that you do and then that's it.
Ultimately, there will be no user interface. That you won't. They will disappear.
What do you mean?
Well, it will just be part of the way that you work. So the thing about artificial intelligence and automation is that it will become invisible. It will just be the way that you do your work. So
but you have to still input new things into it, no? If you want to build a new robot?
Yes. But particularly when we get to the stage where it's become self-building, you just do your day-to-day work. You'll never know that behind the scenes, the robot is actually building a robot for you. The system's building a robot for you until it goes, okay, I can automate this process for you now. And now we can already use recorders. We already use recorders to do the task mining and the task capture. Anyway, so if you want to teach a robot to do something, you just do your day-to-day work and it will pick up every activity that you do.
And maybe a very basic question, because obviously I'm not doing this day to day, but it seems to me like if there's a robot, that means that you can hack the system. Is that possible? For instance, if you know what the parameters are of the CV thing, then you can just have, and I've heard of this, just have a white paper with your CV, but then at the bottom make white text to fill up random keywords, let the robot kind of pick it up or something.
The white text wouldn't be. I mean, if it's on the screen, yes, of course it will pick that up because those images are there. and the robot will pick those up. But if it's paper-based, then it won't pick that up because the OCR will miss it, the optical character recognition, will not see the white text on white background. Can you hack robots? Robots will only do what you tell them to. They can't go rogue. This isn't Terminator stuff. But you can build a robot to do something bad. That's why you need separation of duties. So you need the people who build the robots are not the people who put them into production. So you need to do that check and balance between the people who build the robots and the people who put it out in the wild, basically. And security is critically important. So you can't externally hack a robot at all. A, because it doesn't retain any information anyway, and B, because it's secure both in transit and at rest, as it's known.
The external part I definitely get, like you can't just hack it, you'd have to, but what I mean is on the one side, it could be let's say, a PwC has so many employees and one of the employees decides to build their own robot that does bad stuff. I'm assuming that's possible.
Right, okay. So when you build a robot that is operating on your machine, the code for that robot, or you build a robot that's in the back office as an unattended, the code for that goes to the controller, which is called, in our case, it's called orchestrator. Orchestrator does all the checks and balances and the security and the governance and compliance and so on and so forth. So you can think of an orchestrator like a team leader. So the team leader is checking off the work of the robot to make sure they're doing the right thing at the right time. Precisely, exactly.
Okay, but then that's that problem solved. But what about what I mentioned, the problem from the external side, knowing that certain organizations use robots to check CVs? I'm using CVs because it's the easiest example.
Yeah.
And then you just have to pretty much, let's say a friend who got accepted. You take their CV, you see what the keywords were that they had, and you just, you put a PDF and then just white text with pretty much the same CV, so that that you'll be filtered through.
This is the whole point, that robots only do what they should do. It's that first pass.
But so the first pass is hackable in that sense.
The first pass is hackable, potentially, but why bother if when it gets to the human they go, well, this is complete rubbish. You did not go to Harvard. Or Oxford, or you did not have. In fact, interestingly,
continue.
Interestingly, when we talk about CVs, there's this whole area around gender equality, which is critically important. So when someone writes a job spec for a ninja, that the machine learning models that are associated with that see that as a male thing, because you don't have female ninjas. So what that does is the machine learning model mistakenly will up the number of men as opposed to women, because ninja appears more frequently in the male CVs than it does in the female CVs. So these are all, actually it's all about ethics. It's all about ethical question. And I think that what's happening as a result of COVID is that organizations and indeed societies have the opportunity, this is something I'm passionate about, have the opportunity to reset the social contract, if you like, between an employer and an employee.
What do you mean with that?
Okay, so let's take China. Okay, so China have got this thing where they call 996. So you work from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week. That is a disease, as far as I'm concerned. That is not employee engagement. That is not employee experience. That is, a disaster waiting to happen in terms of burnout and social deconstruction and so on and so forth. That type of mentality. If you look at the US economy, and in fact any industrial and post-industrial nation, what's going to drive the change prior to COVID was demographics. So when I said that our revenues were very evenly split, the reasons that organizations in countries are using automation more or less doesn't depend on the technology, but it depends on the socioeconomic and demographic realities. So the perfect example of that is Japan. So Japan went all out for automation. And the reason was that the Japanese population peaked in 2010. So the entire Japanese population is falling in number. All of the baby boomers, my age and older, are retiring, which means that the average Japanese worker works 60 hours a week. Average Japanese office worker works 60 hours a week. The Japanese government describe dangerous levels of overwork as more than 106 hours a week.
Jeez.
So that's where trouble really starts. In fact, there's a word in Japanese which is karoshi, and it means to work oneself to death, or death through suicide through overwork.
I knew it was bad. I had no idea it was that.
Oh yeah, it's horrendous. So they have no choice. They have to automate. They've got to automate because they just don't have enough people to do the work that's required. So what we're seeing in Japan today is going to be replicated. Just looking at the demographics of number of children being born, and you just see the latest news is that the new babies being born has dropped off a cliff. There's very few babies being born at the moment because everyone's going, I'm not sure what's going to happen. So, and that's not just because of COVID, that's just Western society. So there is no choice, they have to automate. So what we're seeing in Japan is going to be replicated in every industrial and post-industrial nation over the next 20 years anyway, regardless of whether we do anything good, bad or indifferent. It's just going to happen.
But maybe then, like a genuine question that pops up, which I think any employee would have when they hear that, if you can do that with Japan because of a lack of employees, why can't a big company like Ford or something in America or General Motors, whatever, use the same systems and pretty much cut down 50% of their workforce because they're not necessary anymore?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. And that's what we expected. 3 years ago, every business case was predicated on job cuts. How can we reduce the number of people doing this particular job by 50%? Okay, really good example. We talked about the US federal business. There's one particular department that had 790 people doing a particular process. That's a lot of people. And their business case for putting RPA in was to reduce that number by half. They still have 790 people in that department in doing that process.
But why?
But they're now doing 70% more work.
Oh, just because the output gets bigger. But then the other
Precisely.
side of that is, but then they don't need to hire new people as well.
Correct. So you're absolutely right. So what I'm expecting to see is that the ratio between full-time employment and gig economy, which is currently 70-30, will reverse. So I think over the next 20, 30 years, we're going to see a reversal so that 70% of people will be in the gig economy, 30% will be in full-time employment.
So the future of automation and labor will pretty much end up being the gig economy, and rather than...
Yes, I believe that. But so it's our responsibility to make sure that we support the gig economy, that we support the individual as they develop their career in whatever they want to do. So particularly in automation. So we can do that in automation because that's what we do. So we created something called Automation Hub. That is the democratization or the spreading of automation within organizations and across organizations, across industries. What we're seeing and what we're expecting to see is that you can think about the community as a mixture between sort of LinkedIn and Facebook. So we're not setting up a social media organization, of course, but every job that they do, that individual does within the automation market, it will be, I worked at this organization doing this, and I did, whatever, using this technology. And it needn't necessarily be UiPath technology, by the way, either. So that we look after their jobs, we look after their career. So a customer, one of our customers or partners, implementation partners needs 3 people in Kazakhstan or 5 people in Iceland or wherever it might be, we will know those people and say, right, here are a number of people that have done similar things in a similar geography, and you should go and approach them. And I think that's the only responsible thing for us to do.
That is
Ethical thing for us to do.
honestly, like, I started with one question, and we've been talking so long just about this part just because it's so interesting to me. So many questions have popped up that I wasn't able to ask. I want to continue on this thread though before we go back to those questions, which is, we are talking about the US and everything. I remember, I'm not from the US, but I remember when Andrew Yang was going for presidential elections. And honestly, I don't think until then, I knew automation was a big thing because we're automating a lot, not to that level, of course, but we are using a lot of software, hardware to automate as much as possible, especially, in my video company, we're doing the whole thing based on algorithms and automated processes. That's kind of what makes it unique, but not to this level. I assumed it was possible because we were so focused, and this is pretty much automating everything, which is what Andrew Yang was talking about, that the automation is coming faster than we think. And especially if you then have like Tesla, who's making self-driving cars, and then you have these overarching RPAs, like you said, it's just you can connect everything. But so when he was running, obviously you're not from the US, but what did you think of everything he was saying and the future and just everything about what's happening in the US?
Well, it raises really interesting questions about the future of work. Most organisations that have either written reports or have got the analysts to do studies in this have ripped up their reports as a result of COVID. That's a fundamental difference. It would be very interesting to hear what Andrew Yang would say today that he didn't say last year or earlier in the year. No, it was last year, wasn't it? But I think that there is a fundamental change that is coming to society as a result of the world of work changing. Now, that raises that new social contract between employer and employee. It raises ethical issues as to what is work, and how valuable is work. It raises questions as to whether we should move to UBI, Universal Basic Income. And those are political questions that we don't get involved in. But what we do get involved with, in fact, UiPath Foundation is involved with, is working with the World Economic Forum, with the European Commission and the EU, we were signatories to the training up 1 million, I think it was 1 million people on automation that was signed at the White House back end of last year. So those type of activities we are involved in because, as I said, it's our responsibility. We need to make sure that we are doing things in the right way. In terms of the politics, don't get involved in the politics.
Yeah, I think that's a really clear answer and also makes a really clear distinction as to what a business should be doing and a politician, which I've been noticing in the US gets a very blurry line.
It's getting increasingly blurred.
Yeah, sometimes I see comments of people saying, why don't these companies take a stance or something? And it's like, it's not even their job to take a stance. They're just making stuff like software in this case. It's not the point. But I think what you said really well, the stance you are taking is a solution-oriented stance, which is this is happening, so how can we solve the potential downfall of that? And then your answer to that is education, which I believe is one of the most valuable things in the world. Yeah, definitely education. One of my passions has always been looking at how kids are educated and seeing if that could be improved. But yeah, very interesting solution as well.
Yeah, when it comes to education, I'm with the Jesuits. You said that you get the boy in that case, you get the boy before the age of 7. All you need to do is inculcate the desire to learn, that ability to say I want why. It's why is this case, and question and so on. That is education. Education is what you're left with after you've forgotten everything you were taught at school and university. That's a great quote.
I like that. Finally, I can go back to the question I wanted to ask as well, as that we covered like half an hour ago or something like that. But I asked you at the time, which was, this crazy growth had happened. You attracted a lot of venture capital, you said, and then suddenly you boomed till 3,000 people. I want to jump in more on the human part of that. I've never experienced that. I know a lot of startups that go through our program dream about that. I've experienced a small scaling growth where, we would double over the summer, that type of thing. And I've already had issues with that. But I would like to hear your perspective just as a person. What was happening in the office? Did the offices suddenly start growing? What type of people would be coming in? Was it suddenly like huge parties that were happening? Like, what was actually happening as you scale like that? And obviously you were close to the founding team, so did you see how they reacted to it and everything? I'd love to hear.
I mean, I'm slightly divorced from the exec. I tend to hear what's going on, but I'm not part of that decision making process. I'm just a little evangelist. But the people that were involved on a day-to-day basis got very tired. It's hard work. We were opening offices in. We went from one country, one city, to I think we're now at about 30 cities across 26 countries. So that's we have other people outside of those countries as well, but these are legal entities that we set up in those 26 countries. So you need the management for that, and the really clever thing that Daniel and the team did is that they recruited people who could build the business with them, almost like a franchise model. So Koichi Yasugara, Koichi-san, who is our chief executive of our Japanese operation, he dictated what he needed when and built the business that was appropriate to that geography. We got the same in Germany and France and LATAM. And so it's the ability to trust, I think, made it possible. So you hire people that you can trust to do the right thing and trust to build their business. And that I think was the reason for the success. Now, don't get me wrong, we did make mistakes. If you're recruiting, a lot of people very fast, you end up with overlaps and you end up with overspend. And that's why we made a reduction in force, some layoffs in October of last year, because it had got unwieldy. So we've become a lot leaner now. And as a result of the massive increase in business, we're now cash flow positive, which is pretty amazing.
And so that's actually really interesting, because I keep hearing from, we've had actually multiple companies that went global, and the managing directors explaining that process. But you guys went through it pretty fast, which is unique. And what I love what you said is it was almost like a franchise experience.
Yes.
So you would just focus on hiring one person, which is the CEO, and then the CEO did the rest.
Yeah. I mean, that's certainly, when it works well, it works brilliantly. When it doesn't work, then you have to start again.
Were you able to be somehow a part of that experience? Did you see how that worked? Are you able to share maybe?
Well, personally, I was involved from, I spend a lot of my time interacting with the analyst community. So it's the Gartners and the Forresters and the Everests and the IDCs and so on. I keep mentioning them. The reason for that is that they're like priests were 200 years ago. They know what's going to happen in the market before it happens because they're the eyes and ears, basically, of the market. And so I spend a lot of time with them, commissioning work from them, working with them, doing inquiry calls, briefings, and so on and so forth. That's actually been very powerful for us because it meant that we went from very much third to number one on all of the analyst reports very quickly. Indeed, in fact, we ended up in the leader area of the first Forrester report on RPA within 6 months of actually setting up. Now that's unheard of. So building relationships with these people is really important. I keep telling, when I work with the private equity and venture capital organizations, I keep telling the founders, you ignore the analysts at your peril. So that, I think, is a fundamental difference for the way that we worked than some of our competitors.
How can new founders get in touch with, because that's very, I think, focused on industry, but I'm assuming it could be also, tech is very broad, but I'm pretty sure that a lot of tech founders that are not in the finance industry or data or whatever, they don't really know these analysts. So how do you get in touch, and where do you start searching for?
Well, I mean, they do webinars which are free. So you can listen to a webinar, find out if that, or get one of your team to do that, find out if it's relevant to what you do, and then you can ask to do a briefing. You don't need to pay anything to give an analyst firm a briefing. And if what they find you saying is interesting, and boy, do you have to prepare for it, but if they find what you're saying is interesting, then they will get in touch with their friends and go, you ought to listen to this organization because they're doing something different.
Is a briefing like a pitch deck, or is that something else?
No, a briefing is basically it's you telling, it's what we're doing now. It's you telling your story. So and in fact, it shouldn't be a sales thing because they just get this all the time. I mean, analysts forget 90% of everything they're told because they just get, it's a machine. They have so many briefings, so you've got to say something that piques their interest. That's why you should relate it back to what they've actually written. So if reports, the latest reports, of course, cost a lot of money, or you have to actually pay the analyst firm to do inquiry calls, so where you're asking them a question, you have to pay them. But any of the analyst firms, we were able to do a briefing for free. You don't have to be a customer of theirs to give them a briefing. So I'd heartily recommend that to your viewers.
So pretty much the team or the founder looks at the big major analyst firms, which you can Google.
The big ones and small ones as well. There are a whole series of tier 2 and tier 3 organisations that are trying to nibble at the heels of the big guys and girls. So don't restrict yourself just to the Gartners and Forresters and IDCs and so on.
Right, and those analysts pretty much make lists, from what I'm understanding, and then
correct.
And
yes.
then everybody else picks
so
up
Gartner, for instance, I mean, for startups, Gartner have something called Cool Vendor. So they have a list of in a particular space, and if you get on that Cool Vendor list, that is really good news, because what happens is once you get onto the list, you have visibility of everything that happens in the market. That's what happened to us. So because we were in that leader quadrant, that top area, they all call it different things, but it's essentially the same thing. Although we were very much third, any organisation that was considering doing RPA sent us what they were looking for because we were one of the top 3. So even if you're not, you will still get organisations saying, okay, so let's see what number 5, 6, and 7 can do as well. So they'll send you it because it doesn't cost them anything to do that. So then you get a chance to build the relationship with the organisation, with your customer.
So it's almost like free promotion.
Sorry. Yeah, it is. It's the best free promotion.
Right. Wow. No, it's very interesting. I think this is also, like, in the startup space, you have a lot of these pitching events. And obviously they make their own list, but I feel like this is something that the data and finance sector has. It's all these analyst reports, but they're technically not limited to data and finance. It's just kind of tech startups as well that can just apply for it.
Yeah, exactly. That's precisely it.
Great. I maybe something you still want to share about the future of work or what you guys are doing. Maybe
I think we've covered most things. I tend to look, being an evangelist, I tend to look beyond. I don't necessarily focus on what we do as an organisation. I'm more interested in what's happening more broadly, because, as I said, I'm feeding that back into the organisation. So I don't think I need to say any more about UiPath because it sounds a bit salesy. But anyone that wants to try it for free. You go to uipath.com and you can try either as a large customer, large enterprise. You can do the trial version for free, or if you're a small company or an individual or university or whatever, you can set up It takes less than a minute to sign up to be a customer of UiPath.
What I really like is definitely the topics that we've covered, because they are genuinely very interesting for me as well. I think I don't want to wrap up yet. I want to create some more context also for me to understand how you fit into the story. Because one of the things that I found interesting is your past. And mostly the beginnings as well. Because I saw that you started off in the military. Is that true?
Yeah. Okay, all right. I can talk. I mean, the way I describe it is that someone asked me about my career, and I laughed because I haven't had a career. I've had a collection of jobs, but every job that I've done has led up to where I am now.
Could you maybe talk about like maybe kind of all of it, but starting maybe
all right,
there?
Okay. As long as people find it interesting, but it's actually pretty boring. So I started when I did a couple of degrees at university, and in fact, while I was at university, I did my dissertation on computer-based training. So there's computer-based training, CBT. Computer-based training's just started. Lesson number 1: how to use a mouse. That's how old I am. So my dissertation was on the work that I did, so I got paid for the work, and the company was called Talkback Training, which was eventually sold to a big Scottish insurance company because it reduced the amount of time and effort that they had to spend on training. Now, interestingly, it was I knew what I wanted the system to do, because people were taught linearly. But I didn't want to teach people linearly. I wanted them to go and see this document and then that document and then that document. And providing it all came together with the testing, then it didn't matter what order they did things in. And I couldn't find a piece of software that did that until I came across a small software company in Edinburgh called OWL, as in Twitwoo, OWL. No one's ever heard of that business, except that one of the directors of that business was Tim Berners-Lee. So we were using
the founder of the internet.
Yeah, exactly. So we were using the precursor of HTML to build the platform that we created. So that's interesting. So then I went into what did I do? I went into publishing. So
you worked for Tim Berners-Lee for how long?
No, I didn't work for Tim Berners-Lee. We used the software. So Talkback Training used the software that was developed by OWL, of which he was one of the directors, to build the CBD platform. No, I didn't work for Tim Berners-Lee. So then I went into publishing. So I became a production editor for a magazine company. And what that's given me is the ability to proofread and articulate, both on paper and in person.
Why was proofreading so important for your skills now?
Because I spend a lot of time correcting and going through reports. In fact, I talked about the analysts. Analysts, providing you don't bullshit them and you build up a really good rapport, they're now in a position where they'll send me reports before they're published saying, can you give other examples, or does this make sense, or whatever? Because I'm honest. I'll talk about our competitors, as I've done today, and talk about the market. So people generally get a fair view. as opposed to me just saying, yeah, everyone must use UiPath. Um, so proofreading is really important for that, and other things like well, pretty much any written communication. So went from that, and then went into the army. You're absolutely right. I was in the Scots Guards for 4 years. Did a short service commission, so operational stuff in Germany and Northern Ireland, and then public duties.
What does a Scots Guard do?
Okay, so infantry. Stopping the Russians invading Germany, as if that was ever going to happen. Or running around the streets of Belfast getting shot at. That did that too, and also public duties. So changing the guard at Buckingham Palace with the bearskin and the sword. That was what I did too.
You were the one. So it's like the traditional London soldier.
Yeah, with the red tunic and exactly.
How was that?
It was really good actually. It was good fun. Wouldn't want to do it forever, but it was good fun. Getting that mixture between operational and ceremonial.
I heard that the training is very difficult.
Training for the army is quite difficult. I mean, I went to Sandhurst, so in fact, I was very late going to Sandhurst. Most people going to Sandhurst now are all graduates, but when I went, there was a lot of the sort of officer cadets were coming straight out of school, and I did particularly badly on the entrance tests because they weren't sure I actually wanted to join the army. They weren't. The question at the interview was, how long have you wanted to join the army? I said, about 2 weeks, which was true, but not necessarily the answer they were looking for. So they stuck me on something called Row Allen Company. And Row Allen Company is basically for school boys and girls, but boys really, the 17-year-olds who they're not sure they're officers material. And so they basically get, the word is beasted, sort of driven into the ground for 13 weeks to see whether they're up for the right snuff. And here was I, a 24-year-old fat publisher, and they just thought I was going to jack it in, but I didn't.
But why? Okay, that's maybe interesting because you did have a job, you did graduate, and then 2 weeks suddenly you decided you wanted to join the army. What happened?
Well, I had some experience before because I was in the Royal Marine Reserve when I was at university, and expected to go down to Lympstone, which is the sort of the officer training down there, to get a real job and as well as do the army part time. Like what's the equivalent in the US? I can't remember what they're called. But anyway, so but then I got my publishing job, so I couldn't go to the Marines anymore because I couldn't get there. So I joined the Argyle and Sutherland
Wait, is the equivalent like Navy SEALs or something?
Yes. I mean, the Marines are the Marines. So the Marines.
But is it that like that's special forces?
No, God, no.
Oh, okay, then something else.
No, I was definitely not special forces material.
Okay.
But that was all good fun. So I then joined the Argyle and Sutherland Highlanders, and proper Scottish regiment, and had some fun with them. So I'd already had some exposure to the army, so it wasn't completely out of the blue that I wanted to join.
But still, there was a need to serve again. Why, after having a job, would that even pop up in your mind?
That's a really good question. And you said the word yourself. It's serve. One of the things that you're taught at Sandhurst is lead to serve, or serve to lead. Actually, it's the other way around. It's serve to lead. So you are serving your platoon or your company or your battalion, whatever, as an officer, and there is something very rewarding about that. That is that goes beyond being a boss, I think, and it's particularly with highly trained troops, as they all are. It's extremely rewarding, but not something I want. I was married, so it wasn't something I was going to do for forever. So I came out of the army.
How did those skills then help you in the things you're doing today?
Serving, I think it's that ability to get on with people of all walks of life. It's the ability to think on your feet, be both strategic and tactical simultaneously. It's those things that you talk to ex-military people, they're all the same. They all have that ability to operate pretty much regardless of the circumstances.
Do you think there's any other way to learn it except for the military if people don't go to the
military? Of course. Of course. You go become a teacher is another great example. So teachers have that ability as well. So you're dealing with lots of different people of different backgrounds. And I think teachers are quite similar in that way, actually.
That's actually good to know. But so then you leave the army, and then what happened?
So I left the army, I was going to go into. I was interested in tech stocks, so I was going to go and be a trainee fund manager. Funnily enough, there was a gap between leaving the army and actually joining Mercer Asset Management as was part of Warburg's as was, and I thought, who knows about what's going on in the tech market, because I was going to focus on tech stocks, and realised that in fact my wife spotted an ad for a headhunter who was doing a lot of work in tech. And when I said that the analysts were all work in, they're like priests were 200 years ago, headhunters are exactly the same, because organisations hire 6 months prior to actually announcing whatever, because they need to build the team to build whatever it is. So I went to work for just as a part-time researcher for a headhunter, and decided that I didn't want to go into tech, funnily, not into banking anyway. Anyway, I spotted a gap in the marketplace. There are very few really good industry-specific technology-type researchers in the market. And this was in the days before LinkedIn, so finding people is really difficult. Now it's easy. So I set up a company to provide research to headhunters, and I had a unique selling point, was that I guaranteed to get the shortlist, not just the long list, but the shortlist for the headhunters. Otherwise, I didn't get paid, and so I got tons of business. I built up a little business doing that. Interestingly, the organisation that I work with, or organisations that I work with, one of them was focused on the outsourcing market, and so that's how I got into outsourcing. So I ended up working for a company called Equiterra that was acquired by, in fact, Mark Hodges, who I mentioned. Equiterra was acquired by KPMG, and so I then went to do outsourcing. So I worked with Capgemini, as you mentioned, for Unisys, for exchanging, brilliant company, and for Sutherland, and then UiPath. So that's the career.
That's a pretty interesting career. What do you think you've learned from the most that you're applying into every day? We've obviously heard the proofreading, the survey.
Yeah. Well, actually, it's standing here now presenting to a camera with the green screen behind me. It's what I've learnt, because I did some courses on it. Actually, it was on presenting, and actually that isn't just presenting to, in terms of what we're doing now, in terms of podcasts and so on, but to 3,000 people or whatever. So it doesn't matter whether there are 3 people or 3,000 people. That ability to entertain, to serve, is something that I think probably marks me out as the ability to do that. And also the fact that I don't have an ego. So it's not about me. It's about whatever I'm talking about. And I think that helps too.
What did you learn specifically?
He says egotistically.
What did you learn specifically about talking to 3,000 people? I can imagine that could be very interesting for some of our audience who, they have to speak to audiences, and it gets bigger and bigger.
There's a guy in the UK who was a radio disc jockey called Terry Wogan, and I take after him. So you're not talking to 3,000 people; you're talking to every person as though you're only talking to them. So I tend to include them in the conversation if I can. So questions and answers, and I don't present in following a script. I just let the conversation go where I go. So for instance, we've got a whole series of different backgrounds that I use because it illustrates the points that I want to make. So improving customer experience and so on. How does automation help that, and so on and so forth. So all of these things really, really help when it comes to telling the story. And I don't use corporate slides. So it's that storytelling, I think, is the important thing, because it makes it real for people, and they don't hopefully they don't tend to get bored.
I like that. Maybe an interesting thing that we have a segment at the show that we call the crash and burn segment. It's about the biggest failures that you didn't expect and what you learned from them. And considering we're already kind of talking about your history, I'd love to hear what those were and what you learned from.
Biggest mistakes.
Biggest failures you didn't expect and what you learned from those.
Are you talking about me individually or us as an organization?
I'm talking about you, and it could be also as an organization.
Okay.
I'm always interested in stories.
I've actually been very, very lucky. I mean, the failures that I've had have all been because I felt that whatever job I was doing, that I should be at the pointy end of the business, and that tended to be sales. But I am absolutely not a salesperson. I couldn't close a door. I mean, it's just ridiculous. I'm really, really bad at it. So I ended up in sales organisations, and whenever the sales manager changed and the sales director changed, they'd go down their list of all their salespeople, and they'd say, well, who's this person that hasn't ever sold anything? They say, oh, that's Guy. What does he do? He does demand generation, evangelizing, actually, funnily enough. But so I'd be the first to get thrown out every single time, and I was so stupid that I didn't pick that up soon enough. So that's why I'm not part of the sales operation anymore. I'm actually part of marketing. So I've got huge respect for our marketing team and particularly leader Bobby Patrick, our CMO. He's amazing. But I'd always considered marketing to be the sort of the fluffy end of the party people, but it absolutely is not. So 2 lessons that I've learned is A, marketing is really important, and B, you need to be with an organisation that's a product company if you want to scale exponentially, not with a services business. So I spent 20 years in services businesses. I should have been spending that time, retrospectively, in a product company or product companies.
Yeah, you're so right. It's such a big realization as well. I definitely want to cover the topic you just mentioned. Why do you think marketing is so important? What was the realization for you?
Well, Bobby got hired after I joined, but I'd never seen someone who could pull together a team, could hire a lot of people, and generate just consistently great copy for everybody, for press. I mean, All of that stuff that you mentioned at the start, the introduction, about the Forbes and the Financial Times and so on and so forth. This is what marketing does. And if you're growing your organization, you can only scale linearly if you hire a whole load of salespeople. If you create a community and an ecosystem which is driven by marketing, because it's the story that they tell their customers that's the important thing, you can scale exponentially, as we have done.
Wow, that's
nothing less than that. That is the power of marketing.
That's a huge learning lesson as well, because what you technically are saying right now is, be part of a product company, not a service company, if you want to grow exponentially, and make sure that the marketing team drives the most amount of sales, because then you can grow exponentially. And obviously the sales team, if there's a sales team, they will only grow linearly.
Yeah, exactly. Precisely that. You want other people to do the selling for you. And you can't do that unless you market yourself correctly.
What's the role of branding maybe in marketing, or what's the difference between branding and marketing for you?
Okay, so branding is, our head of branding is, or head of brand is Mary Tetlow. And again, she's absolutely brilliant. And her team. Brand is the message. Marketing that supports brand is the story that goes with the message. So it's the embedded message that is the brand. And it has to be clear, unique, concise. And the messaging that you build around it is what supports that brand. And the brand is more than just what you see. Brand is what you feel about the organization. And that's why the culture of the organization is so important. Because if you get it right, everybody loves you. And we are close to that. Yeah. We're not there, but we're a small software business that's come out of the middle of nowhere and grown significantly over the last 4 years. But last 2 years we've grown from 100 million to 400 million in revenues. So we're doing something right, but we're still a tiny, tiny business. I think, and Daniel thinks that, not me, it's not important, but Daniel thinks that we could be a generational business, genuinely a generational business. Yeah. And you need that culture and that brand. It's all tied up in the same thing.
I definitely like how we started very, very technical, which was necessary for, I think, everybody also to understand what is happening in the industry now. To now, I feel the conversation is getting way more creative, maybe, or less technical, but still very relevant to what a business does.
I'm not a techie, so don't ask me questions about the product. There are lots of people out there. I think 60% of our business are engineers.
That's really good. It should be. But maybe it goes well into the next segment, which is our impact story segment, which is obviously our impact talks. But what is the project you worked on throughout your entire history? Could be, also at the beginning. It doesn't have to be here. But what is the project you worked on that had the biggest impact?
Biggest impact externally or biggest impact on me?
Doesn't matter. Both are genuinely interesting to explore.
I think it was probably the army. Straight out of Sandhurst to Germany, and then to Belfast. And this is while the troubles were still going on. The decisions that you made had a material impact on the safety. Physical safety of the team. And that, some people cope with that really well, other people didn't. And particularly when we lost, a couple of people, which we did. I think, my proudest moment, I suppose, is the fact that, the 6 months we spent out there, my team, my platoon, were the only platoon never to be attacked, because I broke the rules basically. The rules stated that you need the central team with the police, because you're there to protect the police, the RUC, Royal Ulster Constabulary, and then you had 4 teams circling around you quite close, so that if you were attacked, then you could go there. I didn't do that. I had 3 teams surrounding me, and then another team way out. Way out. And I know that we should have been attacked twice, because I was told by the special branch that we should have been attacked, but they didn't know where one of my teams was. So that's had the most impact, not only on me but also on the boys.
So what you pretty much did is create some a surprise effect. So those gangs or people who wanted to attack you didn't want to be surprised when attacking you, or what?
Correct. Yes. One thing they didn't want to do was throw something or shoot something and then run straight into the team that they didn't know where it was. That was exactly it.
Did you do that on purpose, or was it just by accident you discovered that?
No, I did it on purpose.
How come nobody else figured that part out?
I don't know, because I suppose the army is the ultimate in rules-based activities, isn't it? Everyone follows the rules.
That's that's very interesting, but it pretty much saved your platoon's life in some cases.
Well, potentially, yeah.
Yeah, potentially. We're kind of wrapping up. I have a last question that I always ask.
Yeah.
It's something requested by the audience, which is, what are you currently doing or learning not related to business, or something outside of business, that gives you energy?
I ride horses. That's what I do. So, in fact, we do as a family. So, my wife and son and daughter, we all ride horses. So I'm learning to ride. I've been riding for in fact, I started learning to ride at the age of 18, because I was trying to impress my girlfriend at the time. Obviously work, because we've been married 30 years. But I'm a passenger rather than a rider. So I can stay on, which is important, but I'm not the world's best rider. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm learning how to ride.
Any tips for people who are interested, what they should be looking into?
Yes, don't buy horses. They're bloody expensive.
What's the alternative? That they just go somewhere and they rent it, or how does it work?
Yeah. I mean, if you want to learn to ride, you need to have the right constitution, and not mind falling off. So.
Nice. I definitely like that. Last question, just out of interest, what kind of books are you reading, or what kind of books would you recommend listeners to read?
Yeah, it's a really good one called World Without Work. It's written by Jamie Suskind, and that's an exceptionally good book, all about the future of work and automation and AI and all the rest of it. That's a really, really good book. And for your founders, there's a book that was recommended by Daniel when I first joined the business, which is called The Hard Thing About Hard Things. And that is an exceptional book as well, about how to scale business and what happens when you make mistakes and what to do with that, and so on and so forth. So those two are really, really good. I'm a big fan, and I'm a big fan of Ian Banks. Sadly died now, but both Ian Banks, he's a Scottish writer, and he writes sort of gothic novels, quite dark, very generally based in Scotland, and but he also writes as Ian M. Banks, or wrote as Ian M. Banks, science fiction, and both sets of books are absolutely brilliant. I've read everything that he wrote. Great author.
What are you getting out of those books? Because they're obviously not business books, so then you're getting probably some life lessons out of it.
No, I just love the way he writes. Oh, and spoiler alert, In almost every one of his books, he kills off the hero at the end. They all die.
That's pretty dark. Yeah. Quick question about that second book. What was it called? And do you know the author?
The Hard Thing About Hard Things.
And so, what does it exactly talk about?
It's a business book. I can't remember who it's by now, actually, but but you can look it up. It's about scaling a business. It's about building and scaling business.
It's a story of somebody who did it, or it's an analysis?
Yes. It's written by someone who's done it. Who's done it.
Wow, interesting. I'll definitely check that one out. Definitely recommended by.
Yeah, and the Jamie Susskind book's really, really good. Right up to date. Bang up to date.
Cool. Well, then that's kind of it. Maybe you have some last thoughts to share with our listeners.
They would have been bored stupid by me by now, but no. I mean, it's been a great conversation. Unusual in that it's not normally about the individual. It's normally about what the business is doing and so on. And this has been a combination of both. So I think it's been very, very good actually. Thank you. But if anyone has any questions, there we go. That's my email address. That's the whole point about this evangelist job. So if anyone wants to find out more about what we're doing or wants to try it or whatever, just drop me a note and I'll put you in touch with the right team. But thank you very much indeed for inviting me to chat and.
I'm 100% sure that we're going to get this question in the comments, so I'm going to ask it before it's too late. But what software are you using to switch between backgrounds?
No, it's Zoom. So on Zoom itself, you can you go onto settings and virtual backgrounds.
Oh, so you're just switching. Okay, I thought you had a software.
So I mean, you can do it very cleverly with OBS, which is Open Broadcast System. But unless you've got, it works better with Windows machines than it does with Mac actually, and you definitely need it uses a lot of resources. So just to keep things clean, then I'm just using backgrounds. But backgrounds work really well. But you need the green screen.
Much smarter,
because that works really well.
No, thank you so much for coming on. I really, really appreciated it. The tips as well as the books and what you do was very relevant. I have to genuinely say this was the first time that I really started understanding how the whole business works of a data business like what you guys do and how the robotics part of that works. So it's been very clear and I want to thank you for making it so clear for me and the listeners as well. Thank you so much for coming on.
Okay, fantastic. Really enjoyed it.
If you liked this episode, you can check out our most recent one here. And if you haven't already, make sure you click here to subscribe and see the next one. But if you're interested in more tips and tricks, then make sure to join our Facebook group where you can find thousands of like-minded people and you get direct access and support to any business question from the entire